She caught me staring, but instead of looking away, she smirked and whispered, "If you're gonna stare, touch too." I swear, the night got warmer after that. I'd seen her around before, in the hallway, on her balcony, sometimes passing in the elevator. Always that same quiet confidence. She wasn't loud. Not the kind of woman who announces herself with perfume and high heels. She carried a kind of stillness with her, the kind that draws your attention without asking for it. She lived directly across from my apartment. I learned her rhythms without meaning to. Mornings, she'd water her plants with a mug instead of a watering can. Evenings, she'd sit out on the balcony with a glass of red wine, a thin cardigan falling loosely around her shoulders, reading something I could never quite make out. That night was no different, except it was. The air was warm, the kind that holds the faint smell of jasmine and rain-soaked pavement. I stepped out onto my balcony after a long day, my head still spinning with everything and nothing. She was already there, sitting with one knee pulled up to her chest, her hair loose and falling down her back in soft, natural waves. A small lamp behind her cast a honey-gold light over her face, making her skin glow like summer dusk. I told myself not to stare, but I did. It wasn't a sharp kind of gaze, not predatory. It was the quiet kind, like looking at something you know you shouldn't touch but can't quite look away from. Her movements were unhurried. She lifted the glass to her lips, tilted it, then rested it on the railing again. And then she looked up, right at me. My breath caught. For a heartbeat, I thought about ducking back inside, pretending I was just checking the weather or some ridiculous excuse like that. But she didn't frown. She didn't look away. She smirked. Not the kind of smirk that tries too hard. It was small, effortless. A woman who's spent enough time in her own skin to know exactly what she's doing. The air between our balconies suddenly felt thicker, like the night itself was holding its breath. She tilted her head a little, a spark of amusement in her eyes. I could almost hear the unspoken words floating between us. "I see you." I felt a flush creep up my neck. My fingers tightened on the balcony railing. She didn't break the gaze. She took another slow sip of wine, let out the softest laugh, barely there, then turned her head back toward the street. And just like that, I was left standing there, heart thudding in my chest, caught in a moment that felt too small to matter and too charged to forget. It wasn't love. It wasn't even flirtation, not really. It was a spark. A silent, knowing moment between two people separated by a few feet of concrete and a lifetime of unspoken things. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't the last time our eyes would meet like that. The blackout happened just after 9. 1 second the hallway was buzzing with the hum of lights and distant televisions. The next, silence. A deep, velvet kind of darkness swallowed the building whole. I stepped out of my apartment, phone in hand, screen lighting up the floor in front of me. A few doors down, someone swore under their breath. And then I heard it. A soft laugh, low and amused. Her. She stood a few feet away, barefoot, phone flashlight casting a soft halo around her legs. Her hair was messy this time, pulled into a loose bun like she'd been home for hours. She looked different, softer, less like the composed woman I always saw on the balcony, and more like someone letting the world breathe around her. "Well," she said, lifting her phone slightly, "either we've been transported to the dark ages, or this is your chance to finally lurk outside my door." Her voice had that warm, teasing lilt to it, not sharp, not mocking, just enough to make my pulse skip. I laughed, awkwardly, because I never knew how to be clever around her. Yeah, I planned this blackout weeks in advance. That earned me a real laugh, not the balcony smirk. A genuine, head tipped back, soft laugh that wrapped itself around me like warmth. "Come on," she said after a moment. "I've got candles. Might as well wait it out somewhere that doesn't smell like burnt circuits." She turned, the light brushing across her bare shoulders. And just like that, I followed. Her apartment was different from mine, lived in, comfortable, the kind of place that had stories tucked into corners, books stacked on the floor, a throw blanket crumpled across the couch, framed photographs of sunlit beaches and faces that made her eyes seem younger. A single candle flickered on the coffee table, throwing a soft, golden pool of light around us. It wasn't much, just enough to make the shadows look alive. "Sit," she said, motioning toward the chair across from her. She sat cross-legged on the couch, her knee brushing the edge of the table, wine glass in hand again. We talked about nothing at first. The building, the unreliable power company, how she once lit her entire kitchen on fire trying to make fondue. She said it like a confession and laughed at her own story. I didn't even realize I'd been leaning forward the whole time, drawn in the way you lean closer to a fireplace without meaning to. Our knees almost touched. Almost. And then they did. It was the smallest brush. A whisper of contact. She didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. Her foot shifted slightly. If anything, she leaned a little closer. Outside, the city was a shadow. Inside, the air was thick with quiet. She sipped her wine, eyes never leaving mine. No words were said. None were needed. I wasn't sure if this was something or nothing. But I knew, standing in that warm circle of candlelight, something invisible had tilted. Just enough to make the world feel different. The funny thing about tension is that it doesn't announce itself. It builds quietly, in passing hellos, in the way footsteps echo a little louder when she's near, in how silence between us starts feeling less like emptiness and more like something holding its breath. After the night of the blackout, everything felt a little different. Not in some loud, dramatic way, just shifted. Every time I stepped out of my apartment, I caught myself listening for her door, her laughter, the sound of her wine glass clinking softly against the balcony railing. That night, I found her struggling at her doorway, a box of groceries balanced against her hip, a strand of hair falling across her cheek as she tried to swipe it away with her shoulder. "Need a hand?" I asked, already stepping closer. She tilted her head toward me, amused. "You offering? Or looking for another excuse to stare?" The words made me freeze for half a second. Not because they were cruel, but because they were exactly her. Sharp and soft all at once. "Maybe both," I said, surprising myself. She laughed, the sound low and warm. "At least you're honest." I took the box from her, and our fingers brushed. It wasn't planned. It wasn't some cinematic slow-motion moment. It was real, quick, warm, enough to make my breath catch. For the briefest second, she didn't move. Our hands stayed there, tangled awkwardly over the cardboard edge. Her skin was cool. Mine was shaking more than I'd like to admit. She met my eyes, really met them, and that familiar smirk curved at the corner of her mouth. Not mocking, not flirtatious in the shallow way, just aware. "If you're gonna stare like that," she whispered, her voice low enough that it felt like it slid beneath my skin. Touch too. The world narrowed. Not because of what she said, but how she said it, quiet, calm, unafraid. I didn't grab her. I didn't even move closer. I just let my hand rest against hers for a heartbeat longer. A quiet agreement that neither of us said out loud. Her pulse was steady. Mine wasn't. Then, gently, she took the box from me. "Good boy," she teased softly, but her voice carried something heavier beneath the playfulness. She stepped inside her apartment and leaned against the doorway, wine-colored light spilling behind her. I stood there like an idiot, trying to look casual when my chest felt like it was carrying a thunderstorm. This wasn't a crush anymore. It wasn't harmless glances across the balcony. It was something with weight. And as the door clicked softly shut, the echo of her voice lingered longer than it should have. That one touch, nothing more than a few seconds of skin on skin, burned like a secret I wasn't sure I was ready to keep. It started with a soft knock. Not the kind that demands to be answered, the kind that waits like a quiet question. When I opened the door, she stood there holding a bottle of wine and 2 glasses by the neck, hair pulled back loosely, wearing a soft cream sweater that hung off one shoulder. She didn't bother with small talk. "Come on," she said, her voice warm and unguarded. "You've got that face again, the one that looks like it needs a drink." I almost laughed, mostly because she wasn't wrong. I followed her back to her balcony, the familiar warm glow from the hanging string lights wrapping the space in gold. The city hummed softly below, distant enough to feel like we were suspended above it, alone. We sat across from each other at first, the little wooden table between us, her bare feet tucked under her. She poured the wine like she'd done it 1,000 times, sliding the glass toward me with a quiet, easy grace. "You always this tense?" she asked, leaning back in her chair, eyes searching mine. "Only when the person across from me keeps catching me staring," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. She tilted her head and smiled. Not the sharp smirk from the hallway. This one was softer, real. "I like it when you stare," she said. Just like that. No hesitation. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full. Heavy with everything we didn't need to say. We talked then, not about each other, not about whatever this was, but about everything else. Her job. The pressure that comes with always being seen as strong. How it's exhausting to be the one who always has it together. How people expect her to be unshakable. I didn't know what to say, so I listened. And maybe that was what she needed. Not a fix, not advice. Just someone seeing her. When it was my turn, I told her about the uncertainty of being in my 20s. How nothing feels fixed. How the world expects clarity when all I have is fog. Somewhere between confession and quiet, the space between us began to shrink. She leaned forward first, elbow resting on the table, chin in her hand. Her eyes softened. Her other hand reached out, brushing away a stray strand of hair from my forehead. I didn't move. Her fingers were light, barely there, but it felt like the world stilled around us. A tiny act that carried more weight than 1,000 big gestures. Her voice dropped low, almost a whisper. "You make it too easy to forget everything else." I swallowed hard, unsure how to breathe around the sudden warmth in my chest. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. The way she touched me, slow, deliberate, like she was learning the shape of the moment, was enough. The night air wrapped around us like a secret. The lights above flickered softly, and I knew, without saying it out loud, that some invisible line had just been crossed. Not loudly, not recklessly, just gently. The morning after our night on the balcony felt different. Not bad, just heavier. Like the silence in the air carried the weight of everything we hadn't said. I woke up replaying her touch over and over in my head. The way her fingers brushed my hair back like it was the most natural thing in the world. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't anything that demanded a label. But it had meant something. To me, at least. But then came the whispering doubt. Quiet at first, then louder. She was older, wiser, grounded in ways I hadn't even figured out yet. I was 20-something, still half trying to figure out who I was. What if I was just a passing moment for her? A sweet distraction, not a future. And I hated how easily that thought dug its claws in. I didn't see her that day. Not on the balcony. Not in the hallway. Not anywhere. And in the spaces where she usually was, all I found was silence. When we finally crossed paths, it wasn't under the soft light of her balcony. It was in the sharp brightness of the hallway, ordinary, too ordinary. She wore sunglasses, hair tied back tight, dressed for the day. She looked composed, like the woman I'd met long before the soft nights and quiet touches. "Morning," I said, trying to sound normal. She gave a small smile. Not the warm one, the polite one, the one that builds walls instead of breaking them. "Hey," she answered lightly, like nothing had happened. And maybe to her it really hadn't. I told myself not to read into it, but I did. She started walking past, and for a second, I almost let her. But something in me clenched. A quiet panic, the kind that whispers, "Don't let this fade into nothing." "You're different today," I said before I could stop myself. She paused. Her hand hovered on the strap of her bag. Then slowly she turned back. "Am I?" Her voice was calm. Too calm. And in that moment, I saw it, the flicker behind her composure. Not indifference. Fear. She looked at me the way someone looks at something they want, but aren't sure they're allowed to have. "We crossed a line," she said softly. And I don't know if that was a mistake. The words stung even though they weren't meant to. I didn't say anything. Neither did she. The hallway between us suddenly felt too wide. The same space that once carried quiet warmth now felt cold, sterile. She took a small breath, like she wanted to explain more, then didn't. Instead, she gave me that polite smile again, the one that didn't reach her eyes, and walked away. I stood there long after she disappeared behind her door. The strange thing about tension is how it can warm a room one night and leave it ice cold the next. And that morning, all I could feel was the chill of something beautiful, beginning to slip away. The knock came just after midnight. Soft, hesitant. For a second, I thought I'd imagined it. But when I opened the door, she was standing there. Not in her usual composed way, but like someone who had been holding something in for too long. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her hair was loose, a little messy, as if she'd spent hours pacing her apartment. She wasn't carrying wine. No teasing smile. No carefully controlled mask. Just her. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I stepped aside without a word. We ended up on my couch, the lamp on low, rain tapping against the window like a heartbeat. She pulled her knees up slightly, resting her hands around a mug I'd made her out of instinct, though neither of us touched it. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It was fragile, like a thread stretched too thin, waiting to snap or soften. Finally, she said, "I've been scared." The way she said it, like a confession that had been sitting behind her teeth for days, made my chest tighten. She looked down at her hands, her voice low. "I don't do this. I don't let people in like this. Not anymore. And definitely not like this." "Like what?" I asked gently. Her laugh was soft, tired. "Like you. You're young. You make me forget how careful I'm supposed to be. And I hate that part of me loves it." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She exhaled slowly, fingers tightening around the mug. "People look at women like me and assume we're untouchable, like we figured life out. But I'm just tired of pretending I don't want things. That I can't want something that feels this real just because it doesn't look like the picture people expect." She looked up then, eyes glassy, but steady. "And I'm scared of what people will say. I'm scared of what it'll do to you." I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. My heart pounded, not from nerves anymore, but from clarity. "I've been scared too," I admitted. "Of not being enough. Of being temporary. Of you waking up one day and realizing I was just a distraction you gave yourself permission to enjoy for a while." Her breath caught. "You're not a boy to me," she whispered. "Stop thinking you are." Something in me cracked open at that. I reached out, slowly, deliberately, and took her hand. This time, there was no hesitation, no holding back. Her hand trembled slightly as it rested in mine, but she didn't pull away. She let out a shaky laugh, leaning forward until our foreheads almost touched. It wasn't a kiss. It was closer to something deeper, a promise built on honesty instead of heat. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, everything else fell away. There, in the quiet of my living room, beneath the weight of our fears and the warmth of our closeness, the walls finally cracked. Not because we forced them to, but because, for the first time, we stopped pretending they were needed. It's funny how the same place can feel completely different after everything changes. Her balcony had always been the stage where everything between us quietly unfolded. The stolen glances, the first brush of warmth, the nights wrapped in soft light and silence. But that evening, it didn't feel like a stage anymore. Felt like ours. The city was alive below. Distant car horns, a train somewhere far off, warm air drifting lazily through the night. The jasmine that grew along the railing filled the air with its faint sweetness. She sat curled up on the lounge chair, barefoot, wrapped in a thin shawl. The string lights above us cast a warm glow that kissed her skin with gold. I leaned back against the railing, wine glass in hand, and watched her. Not like before. Not from a distance. Not with uncertainty threading through my chest. This time I was next to her. Close enough to hear the soft rhythm of her breathing. Close enough to feel the quiet between us settle into something steady. She tilted her head toward me, the corner of her mouth lifting into a faint, familiar smile. But it wasn't the teasing smirk from that first night. This smile was softer. Real. What? She asked. I shook my head. Nothing. Just thinking about how it started. She laughed under her breath. Low, warm. Oh. You mean when you stood there on your balcony staring at me like a lost puppy? I groaned, half laughing. I wasn't that obvious. She leaned forward slightly, reaching out to trace her fingers along my wrist, slow and absent-minded. The kind of touch that says, I don't need to ask anymore. Oh, sweetheart, she whispered. You were. The word sweetheart hit different. It wasn't a game anymore. Carried weight. It was a quiet acknowledgement of everything that had built between us. Carefully, slowly, honestly. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and I wrapped an arm around her. It wasn't a grand gesture, just easy, like breathing, like we'd both finally stopped holding ourselves back. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The world outside faded into a soft blur of night sounds and distant lights. I thought about everything that had brought us here. The unspoken tension, the hesitation, the quiet storm of fears we'd both carried. And somehow it all felt right. Not perfect, but real. Still staring? She murmured against my shoulder, voice half asleep, half smiling. Always, I said quietly. Her fingers brushed against my jaw as she tilted her face up toward me. No performance, no hesitation, just a look that said we found this. And we chose it. I pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. She closed her eyes and let herself lean into me completely. The night wrapped around us. Gentle, warm, and quiet. We didn't need to say what came next. The world outside could judge, time could test us, but in that moment it was just two people who had chosen to stay. And somehow that was enough. If this story pulled you in, if you felt even a little of that warmth between them, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive. Tell me in the comments, what moment hit you the hardest? I read every word.